Hello and welcome to our Fortinet Bitglass webinar. I'm Carmen Villegas, Director of Vendor Business Development for Bitglass. Today I'll be joined by Juan Quintero, Sales Engineer for Exclusive Networks, and we have a very special guest joining us today, Justin Crowley, Channel Enablement Manager for Bitglass. Today's topic is how to maintain consistent security with traditional network infrastructure and beyond the firewall with CASB. All of our regular attendees will have seen this slide before, but for all of our new attendees, this slide represents just a few of our key differentiators. Exclusive Networks' key contribution to the industry is that we specialize in cybersecurity and the cloud, maintaining a specialization within a narrow set of best-of-breed vendors. In this way, Exclusive Networks assist the channel community with vendor-specific and generic training, sales design, implementation, pre-staging, and of course, supply chain logistics, both domestically and globally, filling in the gaps, helping many different types of partners to supply, deliver relevant multi-vendor solutions to their customers. Next slide. Here's today's agenda. Representing to you will be esteemed colleague, Juan Quintero. Juan, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Carmen. And thank you, everybody, on behalf of myself, the Exclusive Networks, and the Bitglass team for joining us today for this presentation. In today's episode, we're going to talk briefly about Fortinet as a preamble on the way to the main topic for today's webinar, which is to educate our partners on CASB technology. We will start with a little overview of how the Fortinet security fabric can protect the traditional network, and then we're going to pivot to a use case where we are transitioning from that traditional brick-and-mortar corporate environment and traditional network infrastructure into a more distributed infrastructure and corporate footprint, and we will see how CASB, or Cloud Access Security Broker, can help us protect data in that use case. Slide, please. So let's take a look at the traditional network use case. Traditionally, organizations have a controlled corporate environment where all employees commute to an office to do their job. And this office has a network, and that network is usually has a well-defined footprint. You have a perimeter, and that perimeter is usually secured by an edge device, a firewall, hopefully a FortiGate procured through Exclusive Networks. And after that, you have an access layer, and that access layer is made up of switches and access points, which, again, hopefully were also procured in the same way. And those switches and access points are what connect the users so that they can get access to all the services needed to do their job: share, corroborate, download, upload, etc. So let's talk about this perimeter. Slide, please. So our tool of choice to protect the edge of the network is the FortiGate. You can think of the FortiGate as a guard at the entrance of an exclusive club. If you want to get in or out, you have to get past the guard, and you better know the password. We have listed here some of the most common free and licensable features of the FortiGate. Many of the FortiGate's most commonly used features like routing, segmentation, user or device discovery and authentication, VPN, and SD-WAN are free of charge, and every FortiGate model comes with these features out of the box. Segmentation is very important to network security and the ability to restrict users' access or device connections. You do not need a license to do that in a FortiGate. You also don't need a license for VPN or SD-WAN. Licensable features, which are on the right, essentially means that they can be purchased a la carte or as part of a bundle, give you the ability to filter the traffic that you're going to allow to pass through your network. Because the purpose of a network is to connect either users to other users, users to business, or business to other businesses, so information can be shared. So going back to the club analogy, you have to allow people to come in and out, but you should have the ability to inspect what they're carrying. You should be able to see what is happening with the traffic that is entering or leaving your network, and that is what the IPS, antivirus, malware protection, application protection, control, etc. allow you to do. Another popular licensable feature is FortiCloud, which stores the FortiGate logs and allows you to view them on demand and create reports from those logs, as well as manage the FortiGate remotely from anywhere. Additionally, through FortiCloud, you can leverage FortiSandbox Cloud for your antivirus protection, which allows you to send suspicious files to be executed in a safe environment in the cloud away from your network. Next slide, please. To strengthen the security posture, you can complement the perimeter security with a FortiSwitch and a FortiAP. This solution is very easy to manage because when a FortiSwitch or FortiAP is connected to a FortiGate, they become essentially part of that FortiGate. The FortiGate is a switch controller and is an AP controller. Everything is managed from the GUI of the FortiGate or from the FortiGate cloud. This gives you the ability to control all the interfaces, including those on the switches and the access points. So essentially, you can create firewall policies to inspect traffic that include the VLANs on your switches, as well as all of your SSIDs. And that allows you to inspect intra-switch traffic and traffic originating from the access points. In your network, you can segment users from IoT devices, which is a recommended practice. You can create different networks for different users. You can control who's connecting, what they're connecting to, where they're connecting from, and see all the information that users are accessing from the internet and all the information that users are sending to the internet. Slide, please. The final piece of a traditional corporate environment security solution bundle, Endpoint Protection, and that essentially allows you to extend the protection beyond the network because an attack can start from the endpoint. Someone who takes their laptop home can install something on that laptop, and then when they bring it back to the office the next day, the laptop could be compromised. Or they could inadvertently bring a USB device that has a malicious file in it. Endpoint Protection allows you to deal with this kind of threat before it ever gets a chance to get to the network. In a corporate environment, if you have a perimeter device and you have a manageable access layer that integrates with the perimeter device and you have endpoint protection, you are doing well. Additionally, to all the network and endpoint visibility and protection that you can have with this setup, there are also physical measures of oversight that are present in a traditional workplace. And I am talking about locked doors, cameras, supervisors, which help to ensure employees are doing what they're supposed to and maintains a certain level of productivity in the workforce. However, as all of you should know, in light of recent events, some or all of those measures are now impossible to enforce. Next slide. Lastly, I want to talk about SD-WAN, secured SD-WAN with Fortinet. SD-WAN is not a security feature, but rather a quality of service feature. And quality of service is being adversely impacted with the increase in remote connections as a result of what's going on. Again, we are being forced to send a large portion of the workforce to work remotely, and we are using VPN, which is free on the FortiGate. But that means that now we're using our bandwidth differently. We are using more of the upload, and a lot of the businesses and most of the users have asymmetric circuits, meaning great download, but not so good upload speeds. So if your network is struggling to keep up because of the added use of VPN, SD-WAN can be the solution, which is built in right out of the box in every FortiGate. Next slide, please. So if before we had a network that looked like a tightly sealed box with a glass lid where admins could see everything, now in the 21st century, we have an open box policy. So in this slide, there's a few things I want to talk about. First being digital transformation, which is a term that is being commonly used nowadays. What does that mean? In my opinion, it can mean different things to different businesses. Digital transformation could just simply be going from paper filing to e-filing. Traditional organization infrastructure is evolving to allow companies not only to expand their reach, but also expand their talent. If you're an organization that has a distributed footprint, which means that your employees can work from anywhere, that also means that you can find talent wherever talent is. Additionally, the value proposition of global reach means that a business can grow substantially, and that means that you need a distributed workforce so you can service customers anywhere. And that leads to businesses that run 24/7 with employees in different parts of the world, all corroborating using digital means such as cloud applications. And that is also digital transformation. There's a lot of maintenance, not necessarily security related, but just plain maintenance that is required and responsibilities that you have when you own devices as an organization. So BYOD, another term commonly used today, from a business perspective makes a lot of sense. BYOD allows businesses who are embracing digital transformation to shift the responsibility of managing devices to the users. The same thing applies to network. There is a certain amount of network maintenance that is required, as well as an oversight that you have to invest in, which includes technology investments as well as manpower investments. So perhaps the companies are saying, you know what? If we can work from anywhere, why do we need to have a corporate brick and mortar setup? And I believe this is going to happen a lot going forward, not only because of COVID-19, but because the companies are realizing that they can be more flexible and more profitable in this way. There were a lot of business owners that maybe did not wholeheartedly believe in the concept of a distributed infrastructure or a remote workforce because they believed that employees needed a certain amount of oversight to be productive. And then, now this happened, and now we're all working from home because the alternative is closing your doors, and that just simply won't do. Some of those businesses are realizing that, they are just as productive, if not better, in this way, and they are going to make long-term and permanent changes. There is a lot of business advantages to this new borderless setup. And going back to the term digital transformation, this new distributed infrastructure setup can be the key to evolving a business to become more flexible and profitable for many organizations going forward. As technology advocates, and that's you guys listening, it is your job to guide that transformation in your clients with technology solutions that will help businesses protect what ultimately matters most, which is data. And that is the commodity of the 21st century. Next slide, please. Now that we have users accessing services and cloud applications from anywhere on a multitude of devices, how can we have any visibility into what the users are doing, the data they're accessing, and what they're doing with that data? Because the data is the last thing left to protect. And this is the use case that many organizations are headed to, one where you shift from protecting assets and infrastructure to protecting data, regardless of assets and infrastructure. In this new setup, you do not protect the device because it doesn't belong to the company. You don't own it. You do not protect the network because you can't control it. And again, it doesn't belong to the company. And the cloud applications, they are as a service, which means that you are consuming them from a vendor. And that vendor only cares about the data as long as it resides in their infrastructure. The minute it leaves, it's not their problem anymore. Corporate data must be protected as it moves in and out of SaaS applications to and from the user. And that is what CASB is all about. CASB is a technology that allows you to get in the middle between the user and the application in order to have visibility and also a measure of control with regards to your corporate data. So to talk about CASB, I'm going to hand it over to Justin from Bitglass. Justin, all yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Juan. So as he was talking about, when you're on a traditional network, when you're on traditional managed devices, the firewall is enough. But what about those devices and those applications and those networks that you don't control? So here's where we're talking about beyond the firewall, these applications that are in the cloud. How do we protect those applications and those devices as well as those networks? And that's where the CASB solution comes into play. Next slide. So what we have here is a full SASE solution. So SASE is Secure Access Service Edge. What this is a bunch of different products all in a single solution. So I know this slide does look busy, but what we're going to look at here is your traditional CASB tools. And we're also going to include Zero Trust Network Access and our Smart Edge Secure Web Gateway. So if you're familiar with how a traditional CASB works, we're looking at API scanning. So if we look at number 1 on the list, we're looking at API scanning. How do I scan and protect data that is at rest? Data that I've already sanctioned to be in those cloud applications. That would be step 1. So we can control data being shared once it's in those applications. The next step is, how do I protect managed devices? So real-time protection. I want to prevent users from uploading or downloading content from managed devices to and from these cloud applications. The next option is option number 3, where we start talking about, what about other traffic? Not just traditional SaaS traffic. What about URL filtering, threat protection, and DLP for unmanaged applications like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? We can do all that as well using our secure web gateway. Our next option is number 4, where, as Juan was talking about, BYOD. So bring your own devices. How am I able to provide protection on those devices? And that's where our reverse proxy comes into play. We can sit in line without any agents and still provide that visibility, provide the identity, provide DLP for all those unmanaged devices to the applications. And as Juan was mentioning, when we're talking about data, data is a new commodity. Well, here's how we can protect that data regardless of the network, regardless of the device, regardless of the application. And that then flows into our topics number 5 and 6 here is, from an identity standpoint, how can I authenticate users? How can I control these users' access to and from these applications? And how do I get visibility analytics? How do I do user behavior analysis on these applications to make sure that the user behavior is correct, or if it is not correct, how do I then control that? And then we have in the top our zero trust remote access. How do I control access to internal applications? If I have something hosted in my own data center or wherever that application may be, how do I now control access to those applications? And how do I then apply DLP and threat protection? We can do all of that with our SASE solution here. So next slide. So what we're looking at here is, what is SASE? So again, Secure Access Service Edge. What it is we have our local data centers, and what we're able to do is, utilizing caching, we're able to increase performance to your cloud applications. So what we can do is, utilizing our AWS infrastructure and utilizing our local data centers, we're able to provide these applications to the end users with much better throughput, much less latency, and we're able to utilize that, as mentioned, using the AWS infrastructure. Next slide. And based on that AWS infrastructure, how traditional networks work, or how traditional data centers work, when it comes to high availability or when it comes to scalability, there's really not much control. When you have the data coming in, you have to have somebody sitting there looking over your infrastructure, making sure that nothing's overloaded. They then have to go in and spin up a new data plane, spin up a new database or a proxy, depending on the overall throughput going through these data centers. Well, what we can do is, utilizing our polyscale architecture, is we can scale on the fly. And what we'll show that is in the next slide here, is utilizing our polyscale technology, we can go ahead and clone all of these databases, all of these data planes, these proxies on the fly. So if you actually jump over to the next slide here, what you'll notice is each of our components can self-regulate. So what we'll do is, each of our components is going to have a baseline. Once that baseline is hit, we can automatically scale each of those components to enforce more traffic, or to be able to take on more traffic. And that's where our overall uptime, and that's where our low latencies comes into play. So for example, if we have a large customer, they have a lot of traffic going to a certain data center, what we're able to do is take each of those components. In the other slide, I was showing our data plane database. I was showing our configuration database, our proxies. And what we can do is scale on the fly. So no, you're not going to have any of that latency. You're not going to have any of that high CPU that you would traditionally see on an existing data center. We're able to scale. And this is what we can do for multi-tenant, multi-app communication between all of our different nodes and all of our different data centers. So next slide. And so what we're looking at here is the 4 pillars of CASB. So what we're looking at, when you look at a CASB solution, we want to first look at the data protection. As Juan mentioned, data is the newest commodity. How do I, A, control access to the application, And by controlling access to the applications, I can now control access to the data. How do I do DLP? How do I do file encryption? And how do I do the zero trust remote access to the data? And once you have access to the data, now what can I do from a threat protection standpoint? How do I make sure that these users aren't downloading malware to a managed device or even an unmanaged device or even uploading malware to those applications? We then jump into our visibility. And so again, now that I've controlled access to the data, now that I've done the threat protection, how can I get visibility into what's happening? So with your user behavior analysis, we can say, okay, what is this user doing to the data? What are the patterns from a logging in standpoint? You know, what locations are they logging in from? What type of devices are they using? What time do they traditionally access these applications at? And then also using our cloud security posture management, we can give visibility into applications like Azure, applications like AWS or Google Cloud, where we can go ahead and report and remediate on your different criteria. So if you have AWS running, we can scroll through and say, do you have best practice enabled? Do you have some of these buckets that are configured where somebody may be able to remotely access it? Are you having, two-factor authentication enabled? So that's part of the visibility. And what we can also do is, again, the data protection, the threat protection, the visibility, and again, the identity as well. So we can integrate with leading IDPs. We can also do our native single sign-on, or we can also integrate with two-factor authentication as well to, again, make sure, and this all loops back into the data, is once I have the data up in the cloud, now how can I control and how can I authenticate those users to make sure that only certain users can access certain data in certain applications? So that all falls under the 4 pillars here of CASB. And as you can see, all of this can be done on managed devices, or it can all be done on unmanaged devices as well. So next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, when we talked about CASB, one of the options was API. So when we're talking about API is great from a standpoint at it can scan your data at rest. So again, it's not real-time protection, it's not inline, but once that data is in that cloud resource, how can I now scan it? How can I now control a user from right-clicking and sharing that file publicly? So once that data is in the cloud, again, we can still apply our DLP, we can watermark files, we can make them read-only, we can copy them, encrypt them, we can prevent a user from sharing them. And again, it all comes down to the visibility as well, as we can track all this. What is Justin doing on a daily basis? What type of files is he accessing? How is his login behavior, over a certain period of time? And then we can alert on all of this, send it to an admin, send it to a user, and then create a report based on that user's behavior. So next slide. And one new thing that we have here is our Smart Edge Secure Gateway. So as I mentioned earlier, what we can do is, what about all the other traffic? So traditional CASBs look at your SaaS traffic. What about all the other traffic? What about our URL filtering from going to a gambling website? So we can prevent users from doing gambling websites during the day. We can prevent them from going to unsanctioned applications. We can prevent them from going to any URL, any category that they should not be accessing during the day. And we can, again, apply DLP. So for example, if somebody's trying to upload something to their own personal Yahoo Mail, their own personal Gmail, we can still apply the same DLP policy, same malware inspection, and get the same visibility into every interaction, regardless if it's a traditional cloud application or if it's just regular URL content. And we can do that through an agent that sits on the endpoint. And what we can do is, utilizing our trapdoor proxy, the agent is actually making that decision. We don't have to send that traffic up to the cloud. We don't have to send it to an on-premise proxy. What we can do is, utilizing the SSL agent within the proxy, we're able to decrypt that traffic, either allow it or block it. And that goes into the one bullet point here, is where we can say low latency as well as secure privacy, because the agent itself can make that decision. So next slide here. And again, this looks like a busy slide here, but this is our entire architecture here. So as you can see, when we talk about a CASB solution, and when we talk about a SaaS solution, when we talk about SASE, this is what this all includes. So when we talk about SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, it's much more than just CASB. It's your CASB solution, it's your secure gateway, and it's also your zero trust network access. So as you can see on this slide from an integration standpoint, so we can still integrate with those on-premise firewalls if we want to look at log information. We can send all those down to on-premise SIM applications as well. We integrate with on-premise DLP or DLP in the cloud. And as we reiterate again, this can be done for managed devices as well as unmanaged devices at the same time. Perfect. So as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about a CASB solution, there's three main ways to deploy a CASB solution. The first is the API. As I mentioned earlier, API is not real time, so it's not going to prevent the data from going up to the application. But what it can do is it can scan the data at rest. So as I mentioned in the slides, when we're scanning data at rest, we can quarantine files, we can prevent it from being shared, and we can still apply those DLP policies to that API, through that API. The next option is the forward proxy. So what we can do from a forward proxy standpoint is I can install an agent on the endpoint, and any traffic that is going out to a cloud application will be routed through Bitglass. But as Juan was mentioning, with everybody working from home now, the biggest use case is unmanaged devices, so BYOD. Now that people are working from home, they're now accessing company resources from devices that they typically wouldn't access from. So what we can do from that standpoint is our third option is the reverse proxy. And this is a way to protect managed devices, managed applications, applications that you are paying for, you have full control over. And we do that by sitting in line through the authentication process. Majority of SaaS applications out there will allow you to configure third-party authentication. And in our case, in the demo, I'm going to show how we can do that from a Google G Suite type of installment here. So what we can do is a user can just go directly to the website. So again, in this case, I am utilizing Google. So you could be utilizing G Suite for your own domain. So what I can do is I've already configured Google to say, if anybody tries to log in for my domain, utilize Bitglass as the authentication. So what happens when I click next, you'll notice that I get redirected. You're probably wondering, why am I at Okta? Remember in the presentation, I was talking about third-party identity providers. So what we can do is, here's one of our integration standpoints, is we can integrate with third-party tools to authenticate users. So yes, the traffic did redirect to Bitglass. So Bitglass is that portal before I can get access to that application. But what I was talking about is Bitglass can be the authentication point. So your users and groups can be installed within Bitglass, but some customers may already have their users and groups somewhere else. And in this case, all of my users and groups are in Okta. So I can configure Bitglass to say, hey, before you allow Justin access to Google, make sure he actually exists. So in this case, I can go ahead and enter in my credentials, and Okta is going to say, yes, this user exists or not. The traffic then gets set to Bitglass. And remember earlier, again, I said one of our authentication methods is two-factor authentication. So this all falls under our access control as well as our zero trust, is to say, you know what, we want to make sure that this truly is Justin. We have sensitive data in this application. So in this case, it could be Google, it could be Office 365, Salesforce, ServiceNow, you name it. I have sensitive data in that application. I want to make sure that before Justin logs in, I truly verify that this is Justin. So I can go ahead and enter in my credential here and verify that I am Justin. I now get access to the application. And one thing you'll notice as soon as I log in is the URL up top changes. So this is where our reverse proxy is coming to play. We're actually changing the URL and telling the browser, hey, instead of going to Google, you should actually be sending the traffic to us first. So what we're doing is we're now able to intercept that traffic all by authenticating the user. Now that we've authenticated, all that traffic has to route to Bitglass. So now what I can do is I can go into my list of files. So remember earlier I was talking about the different methods that we have. We can encrypt files, we can make them read-only, we can block files. So what I can do in this standpoint is say my files are allowed to be in Google. So in this case, I have a file that includes a bunch of social security numbers. My policy has said, hey, yes, Justin, you're allowed to upload this file to Google, but we don't want you downloading it, or we don't want you to be able to download it and put it on a USB stick. So what you'll notice is as soon as I try to download this file here, Bitglass says, hey, wait a second, your policy has said this contains social security digits, and we've gone ahead and blocked it. So what you'll notice, if I actually try to upload or open this file here, the file is actually going to open, but we can actually remove the file. So any of the content that is actually being accessed in that file we've replaced it. And what you'll notice here is if I actually go to my policy, you're wondering, okay, what does that policy actually look like? How do I control that? So when we go into our policy, you'll notice I have my Google applications here. And what you'll notice is I have a download pattern here. So I have a download pattern that says, hey, you know what? If you're looking for social security digits, go ahead and block it. We can also do this through ActiveSync as well. So if you're using ActiveSync within your G Suite, we can actually control access through the message as well as the subject through the email as well. What we're going to showcase here as well is what can I do from a read-only standpoint. So as I mentioned before, we can do much more than just block or allow a file. So again, the use case here, I have a file that includes credit card digits. So again, my policy has said this file is allowed to be in Google, but the use case I always give is, you know, it's a long weekend. We go ahead and we say, you know what, I want to work on this file while I'm up at the cottage. Well, again, we know a lot of the malicious behavior may not truly be malicious. It may just be a user wants to, you know, make their life simple and work on a file offline. So what happens if I actually download this file, my policy is going to say, okay, Justin, you're allowed to download this file, but you know what, we've made it encrypted. So again, say I lose my laptop or, you know, I put on a USB stick and I lose that USB stick. Well, what then happens? Well, the file, as you can see, it actually downloads as a zip file. So if I tried to open this file here, what you'll see is if I actually try to open this, it's going to ask for a password. So if I actually go to my file here, it's going to ask for a password. So if I actually try to open it, it's password protected. So that's another way that we can protect the data once it's been downloaded to the device. So what we can do is instead of that whole either allow or block it, we can put in certain policy to say, yes, they are allowed to download it, but let's go ahead and encrypt it to add that level of security to that file as well. Another use case is what if I want them to download the file, but I want to make it read-only. I don't want them to be able to copy any of the text. I don't want them to be able to take screenshots or print the file. So another option I have, just a file in here that, you know, includes some financial data. It's allowed to be in the cloud resource, but you know what, I'm a little skeptical if somebody's downloading this to the workstation. So what I can do is download the file. And what you'll notice is when I download the file, again, my policy says, hey, you know, based on the content of this file, we've gone ahead and made this read-only. So you'll notice when I download it, it's actually an HTML file. So if I click on that file, it's actually opening it in the browser. And again, Bitglass is saying the only way we want this user to access this content is if they authenticate. So again, if I lost my laptop or lost my USB stick and there's that sensitive data, regardless of where that data is, we're able to authenticate the user and make sure that this is Justin trying to access the content. So I can click on sign in, and now I get access to the content. But you'll notice I can't right click, I can't select any of the content. If I actually try to print the file here, you'll notice that we've removed the print. So even if I try to print this file, we've blocked access to that. So again, this is a way to say, you know what, if this user truly wants to access this file or have visibility into the file outside of the resource or outside of the application, we can allow that, but we can control what happens to that data. And again, once we go to our policy here, you'll notice that from a download standpoint, I have my encrypt for my credit card digits, and I also have my financial file, and you'll notice I have it as read-only here. And what we can do is, again, earlier I was mentioning the visibility that we have. How can I get visibility into all of this? And you'll notice in my policy here, we have a list of everything that has happened for all of my users. So again, if I just click on something here, so event detail from a few days ago, all this data can be sent down to an on-premise SIM application as well. But you'll notice this is from a few days ago. This is an unmanaged device. So even though I have no control over the device, I have no control over the network, but because the application, I'm now able to authenticate the user, I can still get full visibility. You know, what time did they access the application? What operating system? What location are they coming from? What activity was triggered? And what actual file triggered the policy? We don't actually store the data, the file itself, but we store the metadata. So we can still report on that to say, hey, you know, here's a pattern. We're seeing this file being uploaded a lot from Justin. And again, this is all details that we can get, and we don't even This could be a brand new laptop that I just went to Apple and bought, or from Best Buy. So this is all the details that we can give you without even having anything on the endpoint. And the last thing I'll cover here is the API. So remember I said the API, we can scan the data once it's in the cloud application. So again, you could have had Microsoft Office 365 or Google G Suite or any of these cloud applications 6 months ago, and then purchase a CASB solution. We can scan that data and say, hey, here's what's already in that cloud resource. We can scan your emails that are going back and forth to say, are these emails containing any data? So in this case, we'll notice that I'm utilizing Box, I'm utilizing my Google Apps, and I'm also utilizing OneDrive for my Office 365. We can scan all that data and tell you how many of your files are shared externally, how many of your files are shared publicly. And again, remember earlier I was saying it may not be malicious intent. This user just may want to be able to share a file with a colleague or share a file with a partner, and they accidentally share it publicly. Well, we can give you that visibility to say, here are the files that are shared publicly, and here's the patterns that were triggered. So remember when I showed you the policy, I showed you, us doing encryption or read-only, and I showed you the PCI credit card or Justin's financial data. We can take those patterns and scan all of your data at rest and tell you which files match any of these patterns. So again, I can go through here and, for example, here's Justin, here's a file that's shared privately, and here's, confidential doc. I can click on that file, and because it's in the application, it's stored somewhere, I can get all this data about this application. Where is this file being stored? What's the status of it? When was it last modified? Does it trigger any of my data patterns? And what data patterns am I actually looking for? So we can actually scroll through here and get all those details. So here's one that actually triggers a DLP event. So again, you as an admin want to make sure, I want to know that there are no files or any data within this cloud application that are PCI compliant. So what I can do is I can click on it, and again, here's the file, here's the patterns that this file triggered. We also give you any hashes on those files as well. So if this was a malicious file, you can click on this and it will take you to VirusTotal, or it will take you to Google as well, and it will tell you, is this file malicious? What type of virus scan did I run against it? And as I mentioned earlier, we can do that ATP, so Advanced Threat Protection as well. So here is a malware file that I have. So again, I can click on this and I can view all the details on this file and say, okay, what is the actual patterns that trigger on this? So this is everything that we can do from an API. Nothing has to be deployed on the endpoint. It's just a cloud-to-cloud connection, but we can give you visibility into all the data in your cloud applications. So that's the end of the demo here. So what I'll do is I'll pass it over to the exclusive team, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Justin. And this is all of the valuable Bitglass and Fortinet resource available to you to obtain additional information and training. Next slide. You can also contact your direct exclusive networks account manager or myself or Alex, whose details are listed here below. Here you can also see our best of breed vendors I mentioned earlier in the webinar. Also, please make sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date with all of our latest news, offering, and updates. Look for our exclusive networks monthly newsletter for a consolidated snapshot of our vendors, news, tools, and upcoming events. Next slide. Go ahead and hand it back to Justin to go over some partner incentives. Justin, the floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Carmen. So Bitglass is excited to be launching a new spiff that runs from July 1st through the end of the year. You can earn up to $750 for every new deal brought to us. We are paying $250 for every meeting booked by a partner, sales rep, or systems engineer. And you can earn more if the meeting turns into a POC. We'll be paying $500 to the partner SE who helps with us during the POC. And in order to qualify, you must be signed as a Bitglass partner, submit an approved deal registration, as well as the opportunity must be over $50,000. You can reach out to your exclusive rep for more information or email partners@bitglass.com. So thank you very much, and I will pass it over to the exclusive team for any questions.